Hi. It's been a while since my last video and my last article. Life happened and it's been a lot busier than I was expecting. So I decided to uh, switch gears a little bit. And by that I mean that at least in the first article, and I was hoping to do this in the subsequent topics that we discuss. What I did in the first article that we discussed was to have a writing in Romanian, in English, and the video in Romanian and in English. And that was quite a bit of work. I was quite happy with it, but it turns out that I don't have that much time to do all of it at once. So I considered, and this is what I'm doing with this video, to desynchronize things a little bit. So from now on, at least for the foreseeable future, I will be posting videos before I post the written content, in hopes that I'll be able to post more videos and discuss more topics with you than if I waited to finish everything in one go. For to have a little bit of an idea of how this works for me, usually I write the articles, I transcribe them, I edit them, then I translate them from Romanian to English, and finally I start making the videos once I've cleared up what I want to talk about. But it takes a long time to transcribe the articles, to edit them, and then to translate them, and finally get to the videos. So I'll be short-circuiting that a little bit in hopes that we'll be able to talk more. Anyway, this video is going to be part of a series on the topic of being ourselves. This stems from a piece of advice that we're often given. It's especially frequent in English when we go through like a difficult challenge, when we have to undergo a difficult challenge, like going to a job interview, going on a date, or what have you, and we start worrying, right, about how it might go, how should I dress, what should I say, but what if they say that, but how do I respond? It's a lot of worrying in our head going on because we care about that particular situation and we want things to go well. And oftentimes the people around us, especially people who have a little bit more experience in life and who are maybe a little bit wiser than us, they give us this piece of advice, which sounds something like, don't worry, just be yourself. And it's very good advice. It's sage advice. However, we don't understand it. People who give that advice usually don't understand what they mean when they say just be yourself. It's sort of an implicit thing. Because if I tell you to be yourself, right, I don't know how that looks like for you. I don't know what it means for you in particular to be yourself. Likewise, when I get that advice to be myself, my first reaction might be something like, what are you talking about? Right? Because in that moment, when I worry, for example, is that not part of myself too? And there's a mist of confusion starts appearing when we get that advice. And it's confusion on both sides of the discussion. And I'm hoping to help navigate through that confusion, through that mist, to get a little bit of clarity. And so how I want to do that is, first of all, let's see why be ourselves. And for that, my answer comes from a more religious background. The church fathers often talk about how man was made in the image of God. And if you read, there's a great book by Jean-Claude Larchet. It's called Therapy of Spiritual Illnesses. I think that's the title in English. And in that book, he synthesizes a lot of writings by church fathers. I haven't finished reading it, but he mentions this thing that the image of God in man is actually ourself. he says that the self, according to the church fathers, is the image of God in man. And this is also something that Carl Jung says. He often talks about an imago Dei, which means the image of God, and that is our self. Now, where Jung and the church fathers diverge is in terms of how they see the self. Jung uh, tends to see the self as containing both the potential for evil and for good. And for him, in some sense, it's not so much a question of how good or bad you are as it is just be yourself. Whereas the church fathers, they say something like, to be yourself means ultimately to be like God, and so you are good by, or as good as you can be by becoming yourself. And personally, I tend to adhere more by the church fathers' teaching. Though there is something very important to say about Jung's view as well, because we do have a shadow, we have a potential for a lot of mayhem, a lot of destruction. But that doesn't necessarily mean that if you end up causing that mayhem or destruction, that you are necessarily yourself. So this is why I would say it's important to be ourselves. The church fathers also say something that I find very endearing in a way, very encouraging to become ourselves. They say that we ourself is made in the image of God, and it is the spark of divinity. But they also say that to manifest that image in concrete action, in our day-to-day actions, so to be ourselves in our day-to-day actions, that, according to them, is becoming like God, so manifesting the likeness of God. Because in Genesis, we have this passage that says that man was made in the image and likeness of God. And the image is the self, and the likeness to God is acting as ourselves. So this is why, for me, it's very important to work on becoming myself, and to work on in general, to this idea of becoming ourselves is important to me, because it brings us a little bit closer to God. Now, how do we become ourselves concretely? In my experience, such as it is, I've found a series of principles that help guide the way to becoming ourselves. I'm not very much interested in prescribing things to people, to telling them, look, this is what you should do, this is how you end up becoming yourself. I prefer rather to instill an attitude, and then from that I'm hoping to give you the tools to help you, more like to help you find the tools with which to become yourself. So with the proper attitude, I'm hoping that will help navigate that mist of confusion. So we're going to be discussing in this series 4 principles for knowing ourselves, for understanding ourselves, and for acting like ourselves. And the first of this principle is radical honesty towards oneself. Then the second principle is orienting ourselves towards peace. The third principle is taking care of ourselves like we're someone responsible for caring. And the fourth and final principle is that we have everything that we need in ourselves. Now, in this video, we're going to be focusing on the first principle, radical honesty with ourselves. This idea I got from Jung, actually. He wrote a lot of very interesting things, one of which that really struck a chord with me, and which I've been trying to understand better over time, is some psychologists may not necessarily like that I'm saying this, but Jung said that a good alternative to therapy is radical honesty with oneself. Now, what does that mean exactly? Well, it means 2 things. Radical honesty with ourselves means, first of all, not to lie to ourselves about anything. And that's a lot tougher than we might imagine. Sorry. Because oftentimes it's a lot easier to lie to ourselves about various aspects of our personality and of ourselves than it is to see the truth for what it is. We can, for example, lie to ourselves in terms of our abilities and our virtues. Uh, it's very easy to think of ourselves as being better than we are, or to think of ourselves as more competent than we are, or more honest, or what have you. For example, if we have a job interview for an important job, and there's even maybe an evaluation of some sort, a technical evaluation, it might be tempting to say, if we've undergone a few jobs or in a few job interviews, that, well, I don't really need to prepare anymore, because I mean, after all, I know what I know. I'm pretty good at what I do, so why should I prepare? I'll just go there and knock it out of the park, right? And maybe the answer in that situation is something like, well, you should prepare a little bit at least. Maybe you don't. Maybe you're actually really good, but oftentimes we're not as good as we think we are. We can be, but we're not yet. Or that's one type of lie that we say to ourselves, to inflate ourselves beyond what we really are like. But we also often lie to ourselves in the opposite direction, right? We underestimate, we minimalize our virtues, our potential, our capabilities. So, for example, maybe we studied really hard for an exam, and we take the exam, and after it, of course, we start worrying that, oh my God, I screwed up. I'm gonna fail. I'm gonna have to retake this course, and it's gonna be just terrible. Maybe you've been through that, or maybe you have a friend who's been through that. Probably you know someone like that, right? And when the results come in, it turns out that not only did you pass, but you passed with a very good grade. And in that moment, some people, what actually they do is they don't see the grade and think, oh, well, I did better than I expected. No. They think something like, well, yeah, okay, I got this grade, but look at all the mistakes that I made. I made so many mistakes in this. I shouldn't have written this like that. I shouldn't have solved this like that. And for sure, there's something wrong with the professor for giving me this grade. Surely they didn't see all these mistakes that I made. So yeah, we minimalize a lot of our accomplishments and our virtues and possibilities simply because we've gotten used to lying to ourselves like that. So we can lie either way, right? Inflating ourselves or devaluing ourselves. And that's the part about lying. But there's as well, some things that we lie to ourselves about aren't necessarily with a positive or negative trait valence, right? We're not just talking about how great or how awful we are, but sometimes there's things in ourselves, emotional experiences, for example, that are very difficult to accept, to deal with. Traumas like that, for example, and we often deny that aspect of ourselves. We say, that can't be. I'm not like that. I haven't done that. I haven't gone through that. And that's also a lie that we tell to protect ourselves, of course, but it goes against this principle of being radically honest with ourselves, which is supposed to be therapeutic. So that's the part about lying. Now, telling the truth to ourselves is a lot harder than it sounds, because and this is something that Jordan Peterson often gives as a piece of advice, a very good piece of advice. He says, tell the truth, or at least don't lie. Right? Because not lying and telling the truth aren't necessarily the same thing. Let me give you an example. Now, I just graduated from my master's degree, and so I have this. I have many examples from exams and so on fresh in my mind. So I'll be giving you another example like that. Um, let's say you have an oral exam, right? That you have to undergo to take, and there's a question that pops up that you simply don't know the answer to. Now, in that moment, things could go a couple of ways. You could, for example, try to bullshit your way through, right? Just, well, you see, things are sort of like that. And if you remember the reference to whatever article that I read that isn't at all related, they said something like this, and it means this. And you see, you sort of try to weave your way through a half answer and hope that you'll get some points for it. That's the path to lying. And the truth, we don't really know what the answer is, right? We can't really tell the truth in regards to what the question is asking because we don't know the truth. Now, an intermediate might be something like to look the professor straight in their eyes and to say, I don't know. And that's hard, right? And that's the distinction. That's why Peterson, for example, says to tell the truth or at least not to lie, because there's some space in between not lying and telling the truth that leads us a little bit closer to the truth. We can also continue lying, but that's what I'm talking about. So it's hard to tell the truth to ourselves, especially, and to others as well. And it's an effort. Now, how do we get to the point where we can not lie to ourselves and tell the truth to ourselves? And you'll see, I hope, by this point that I'm not really saying we should confess everything to others about ourselves, right? I'm not saying if you discover some particularly unpleasant experience in yourself that you necessarily have to share it with someone else. It can help, but the starting point for me is always to understand, to come to know, and to understand what the hell is in there. Then I can decide if I want to share that with someone else. And so, how do we get to telling the truth to ourselves? Let me give you an example from my own life. It's not something I'm particularly proud of. I'm not very happy with the way things went. Nonetheless, I think it'll help illustrate what I want to say as a sort of concrete action that we can take to come to say the truth. So, this was a couple of years ago. I was at my place with my fiance. Back then, we weren't engaged yet, and she lived in another city in Brasov, and I was in Cluj. And she would come visit from time to time. This was one of those times. In that situation, there was something that I had to do. I forget exactly what. It doesn't really matter. The point was that I wanted to do that thing by myself. I decided to do it by myself to see just how far I can take things if I just do this one thing by myself. I had a strong desire to do it like that. And I knew that if I talked to my brother about it, he would offer to help. Of course, as a brother does. And I knew that it would be a difficult discussion. Nonetheless, I talked to him, and the topic of doing that thing came up, and I told him, look, I want to do this by myself. Then he, being a good brother, he offered to help. He said, look, let me help you. I'll do this thing with you, and it'll go better, you'll see. And I insisted. I became insistent, and I told him that I wanted to do things by myself. My fiance was next to me, and while I was talking on the phone, and when I kept insisting that I wanted to do things by myself, of course, my brother, what I felt he was saying, it felt like he was criticizing me, telling me that he thought it would be wiser if I just accepted help and did things with him. And to not be so hard-headed. And I was hearing this over the phone, and in the meantime, my fiance was hearing my brother, and she sort of chimed in. She started whispering to me, "Just take the help. Just come on. Why do you have to be so stubborn? Just take the help." She didn't say exactly like that, but that's how it felt like to me. So anyway, I got upset, and I ended the conversation with my brother. We didn't really argue or anything. I just ended the conversation. And what I did after that is I was sitting down, and when I got up, I pushed my fiance aside. I didn't like full on, slam her or anything. I just gently brushed her away because I was feeling emotionally threatened, and my response to that was to push her away to get some space. So she got upset. I was still upset over what happened because it felt like they were teaming up on me, so to speak. And we had to go to the mall. There was something we had to get from there, and we got dressed silently. We didn't say anything to each other. We went downstairs also in silence, and we went about halfway through to the mall in silence. I mean, it was so weird because we were walking next to each other, not looking at each other, not saying anything to each other, like we were two strangers. So weird. And on the way there, in that moment of silence, in that situation, and this is what I wanted to get to, what I learned to do over time vis-a-vis radical honesty with myself is to start asking questions. And the first question that I asked myself, and this is a very useful question to ask yourself, especially in difficult moments. When it's easy, when we're going through a good time, it's easy to ask this question, but when it's hard times, it's a little bit more difficult because there's a lot of emotions involved. So I asked myself, why am I so upset? And be careful here. This isn't a critical tone, right? It's not a why am I so stupid type of question, or why did I act so foolishly? That's not the point here. The point is to ask this why question to yourself the way kids ask that question, right? Because when a kid is curious, they ask something like, why are there clouds in the sky? Right? And it's a very innocent question born out of genuine curiosity, a genuine desire to understand. And so this is the sort of attitude that we need to adopt, the sort of way to ask this why question. So that's how I tried to ask it. I asked myself while we were walking down the street and I was thinking back about what had happened, I asked myself, why did I get so upset? And I listened for an answer. And the first answer that came up was something along the lines of, well, I got upset that I wanted to do things by myself, but they wouldn't listen to me, and instead they kept egging me on to take the help. And that's the first level of the answer. But I decided to go one level deeper, and it helps to learn to do this as well in your situation, right? Because when you start asking this why question, you can go a little bit deeper, sort of the way kids do. They can ask, well, if clouds are in the sky because of that, why is that the case? Why is that the way things happen, and so on? And you keep going deeper, as deep as you can. And it's the same with becoming honest with ourselves. So I asked myself, why was it so important to me to do things by myself? And the answer to this question didn't come up immediately. And I could feel that it started becoming a little bit uncomfortable to myself because I was entering unknown territory. I didn't know really what was out there. I didn't understand what would come up. But in time, not too long after I asked the question, an answer came up along the lines of it wasn't really words like a thought, you know. It was more of a general feeling and an intuition of what happened. And oftentimes you'll find that when you start trying to understand, to come to know and understand yourself, some answers aren't so clear cut. You can't really put them in words. It's more like a feeling in your body or an emotion that you feel or a bunch of memories that come up. And this was something like that. In my case, I I had these intuitions about what the answer might be. Now I can put it in words after so many years have passed. The answer was something like, in the course of my development, what often happened is I would try to do something that was maybe a little bit more difficult by myself, and um, I would be met with this very caring attitude of, you don't have to worry about doing that. Don't worry. Don't worry about, I don't know, hammering a nail into this plank or anything. I'll do it. Just you go play. You go relax. Don't worry about these things. We'll take care of them, right? And I started feeling this strong need to do some things with myself, to see just how far I can take things if I just do them by myself. And I started compensating over time in the opposite direction. So if I uh, had a lot of help when I was little, I started deciding to try to do things by myself when I grew older. Now, this isn't to say it's a great thing or a foolish thing. I'm just trying to formulate an answer in as clear a sentence as I can make it. And so that was the second answer that I got. And I communicated these things. I felt the need to talk to my fiance about those things, and I told her, look, I'm sorry about how I acted. I got upset. Here's why I got upset. Here's this need that I feel, and we worked things out. Of course, the conflict was resolved, and she understood a little bit better. And actually, she appreciated that I could put those things into words and express them to her, so she could understand me a little bit better. And things didn't really stop there in terms of asking this why question. I I started asking that question again and trying to figure out. Well, it wasn't really that question; it was a different question. But I asked myself something like, "Is there something else? Is there some other reason for why I got so upset?" And this didn't come until much later. It took months, even years, to come to a better understanding of what exactly um, it meant that I got so upset over receiving friendly advice. And I realized over time that I'm not very comfortable with criticism. It's a little bit difficult for me to take criticism, even when it's constructive, even when it's friendly advice. If it goes against the way I see things, I have a little bit of a hard time taking it in. So that's something I have to work on, of course. But this is what I wanted to get at, right? It's honesty. It's radical honesty. I could just as well not admit that I have a problem with taking criticism. I could just say, and we often do this, me, I don't have a problem with criticism. It's these dumbasses that are mean to me, are critical towards what I have to say and do, and they're the problem, not me. And so that could be just as well an answer, that we choose to believe over the truth, which is we don't take criticism very well. And this is a cool thing to keep in mind. This is something that Jung said in a different writing. He mentioned that um, what upsets us in other people is indicative of things in ourselves. So what this is supposed to mean is something like, we have the potential to do a great many things. We have the potential to do a great many good deeds, but we also have the potential to do a great many bad deeds and to cause a lot of mayhem. And oftentimes what upsets us in other people is actually us seeing that potential to do mayhem that's also in ourselves. Because if we did that, we would not think very highly of ourselves. So we externalize that possibility. We project that possibility onto others. Oh, you did that. Then, well, you're kind of stupid, you're kind of evil, you're kind of the devil, let's say. And it's a very easy method to not look at ourselves, and it's also a very easy method to not have to understand the other person and why they did what they did, like we try to understand ourselves and why we do what we do. So yeah, you can watch yourself as well, not just when you get upset, but in general, things that stir you up in others are indicative of things in yourself. Doesn't mean that you'll necessarily do those things, but it's important to understand why we get worked up, let's say, why we feel the way we feel towards people, towards ourselves, towards life, and so on. And as we get closer to the end, I just want to point this out. There's actually 3 aspects that I've sort of alluded to already in regards to being ourselves, right? To be ourselves, we have to know ourselves, right? This is sort of descriptive knowledge about ourselves. This is, I am like this, I have done this, so on and so forth. That's sort of a theory, let's say. Then there comes understanding ourselves, which is applying that theory we have about ourselves in the context of our own life experiences, right? So this example that I gave about being upset with my fiance and my brother, this is an experience, and over time I've come to notice in other situations that there's a pattern, right? That I've started deriving from that knowledge and understanding that goes a little bit beyond words. So it's sort of being able to say, oh, so this is how I act, without necessarily having to describe the whole thing. That's understanding, let's say. And finally, the third thing about being ourselves is to act. We have to act as ourselves, like ourselves, and so on. This doesn't mean that if we realize we have a problem with getting too worked up over constructive criticism, for example, that being ourselves necessarily means I should continue being upset. It's more to act like ourselves is, since ourself is the image of God in man, is to start acting in a more ideal fashion, to start seeking what the ideal action in that situation might be. So maybe if I stick to the example of getting upset with my brother and my fiance over wanting to do things by myself, maybe an ideal answer to how I could act in situations like that is to learn to communicate, to say, look, I hear you. I hear that you want to help. I hear that you think I should take the help, and I very much appreciate that you offered it. It means a lot to me that you care and that you want to help me. Here's the thing. I have this weird desire. I can't really tell you what's going on, but I feel like I want to do this by myself. I really, really want to do this by myself. I know maybe it's stupid. Maybe it sounds stupid to you, but I feel the need to do it. And oftentimes when you learn to express that understanding of yourself to others, they'll sort of leave you be. They won't necessarily be happy. They don't have to be happy, but once they get it, that, oh, okay, you have a reason. There's something going on that you feel so strongly about that you want to do this by yourself, usually they'll leave you alone. Not always. Sometimes they'll be pushy and try to, I don't know, maybe change your mind, and it's okay. But yeah, that's maybe a little bit wiser than just lashing out, you know? So, anyway, this was the first principle, right? Radical honesty with ourselves, and it implies not lying to ourselves and also learning to tell the truth to ourselves. And this second part, we can get a little bit closer to telling the truth by learning to ask the open questions to ourselves, right? To ask ourselves, why am I acting the way I'm acting? With a genuine curiosity, like I said, like a child asking why there are clouds in the sky. And to learn to wait for those answers and to learn to listen for those answers. Sometimes the answer will be an actual thought. Other times it'll be like a feeling in our body, an emotion, a memory that comes up, what have you. And to really learn to sit with those um, thoughts and emotions and feelings and memories and whatever else comes up, intuitions and so on. So yeah, I hope this was useful. This was the first video. In the next one, we'll be talking about orienting ourselves towards peace. This is going to be an interesting sort of discussion, I think, because it's not going to be the traditional kind of peace that we think about when we say to make peace. It's more sophisticated, and it comes from an article that I read from Jordan Peterson. Very interesting. So yeah, that's the plan. Hopefully I can put the next video up sooner than I did this one. And thanks again for watching. I really hope these things make sense to others, and I hope that they prove useful beyond being more or less interesting. This is really what I hope to accomplish, to uh, give things to people, to give knowledge and understanding to people, and um, maybe some tools here and there that are useful concretely in your day-to-day life. So if any of what I said manages to accomplish that, it's a great success to me. Anyway, thanks very much for listening all the way to the end. I'll see you in the next one. Have a nice day.